Lactic acid. That's the stuff that makes your legs burn in agony when you're riding your bike as hard as you can, right? Wrong. It's actually a myth that's pervaded sports for decades and one that many people still believe to this day. And not only is it not some sort of poison that you want to get rid of, it's a source of energy. It benefits you. So what if you had more of it? Well, in the past, taking lactate as a supplement was impossible. It tasted vile and caused chaos on the stomach. But a group of scientists have now developed a new type of gel that apparently tastes okay and digests perfectly. Those same scientists are making some pretty bold claims about its benefits to cycling performance, and we now know that it's already being used at the Tour de France. But is lactate truly the next revolution in endurance nutrition, or just the latest round of sports science snake oil?
High-end responder, we have seen up to 4%.
4% is huge over that 20-minute effort.
When you stop riding, it's not because you are running out of energy. If we make a biopsy at that moment, you still have plenty of energy. You can still go for minutes.
Not everyone is going to expect a 4% increase in performance in a 20-minute test.
So if lactic acid is not the toxic waste product we thought it was, what's it actually doing inside our legs? Well, to understand that, I sat down with sports scientist Dr. Aitor Virbe, former lead of human science at Ineos Grenadiers, and one of the people behind the development of this new lactate gel. He explained that the sports world has been a little bit unfair about lactate over the years.
So I'm going to use again this analogy of the ambulance. So if an extraterrestrial comes to the Earth and every accident they see, there's an ambulance, they might think that the ambulance is causing that accident. But we know that the ambulance is there for help. Lactate is always there in the crime scene, but it's not definitely causing that fatigue. So I think we have been pretty unfair with lactate, unfortunately, which is good. It's just like the science. We have understood lactate differently, but we know that it's not producing fatigue, but it's also there. It's only there because we cannot use it anymore, so it gets accumulated.
I actually thought that was a really good analogy as to why there's been such a misconception about lactate for so many years. Lactate essentially being the ambulance, not the car crash, so it's the help and not the problem. It is a premium, highly preferential fuel source that your mitochondria burns for energy. In fact, it acts as sort of like a cellular VIP, travelling freely around the body to wherever energy is needed most. So how would exogenous lactate, i.e. lactate taken as a supplement, help our performance? Well, for a couple of years now, sports scientists and endurance athletes have hit a bit of a ceiling on nutrition. Most human guts can only absorb a maximum of around 120 to 140 grams of carbs per hour. I mean, there are exceptions. So according to EF General Manager Jonathan Vaughters, they test every rider's ability to assimilate carbohydrates, and former Grand Tour winner Richard Carapaz is capable of consuming and utilising 160 grams per hour. However, because exogenous lactate uses completely different entry pathways, it acts as a secondary fuel line that could be used as fuel by all athletes. At least that's the theory.
Lactate can be, and I again use this analogy of the AdBlue, you know, the DSL and the AdBlue. It can be an extra kind of compound that make that DSL be more efficient, if you want to call it that way. So high carbohydrate intakes, I think they can benefit from adding lactate on top of them. And that's something that we're trying to understand.
According to Aitor, the fueling protocol is as follows. 15 to 20 grams of lactate each hour on top of their massive carbohydrate intake. So 3 or 4 gels per hour, each of which contain 40 grams of carbs plus 5 grams of lactate. This is what they've been using during their own testing of athletes. That testing is still in its early days, but Aitor says that their early findings suggest some athletes respond better than others. And if you're a responder, there is apparently a significant gain.
I mean, anyone who is on the other side of the camera, of course, it's not going to give a lot of value of what I say, because at the end of the day, those are our studies. I can see a number for a high responder. High-end responder, we have seen up to 4%. 4%,
4%. In what duration of power?
In 20 to 30 minutes of maximum kind of all-out effort.
So to give an example of a Tour de France rider who's doing 450 watts for 20 minutes, you'd be looking at 20 watts roughly increase. Significant.
Ideal estimate. It seems like fiction science, but
Yeah, and I take your point, and I think our
Yeah.
viewers will take your point that we haven't got any public studies yet.
Yeah.
I think they'll also be listening to you and understanding what your personality is like, where you're saying, look, we don't know everything. You seem like a very genuine guy, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. And we'll wait for the bigger studies that will
20
hopefully
watts.
come. Yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah, it's really significant. And you think that on top of that, there might also be, in addition, some help with resistance to fatigue in the longer races?
I think so. We published a couple of papers 2 or 3 years ago. They were on durability. Durability is now the kind of the hot topic. At the end of the day, durability is the capacity to sustain your capacities over the time. Durability is highly dependent on nervous system. So when you stop riding, it's not because you are running out of energy. If we make a biopsy at that moment, you still have plenty of energy. You can still go for minutes.
In the form of glycogen stores?
Yeah, or energy in the body. It's not lack of energy, because you've got plenty of energy. Actually, if you rest a little bit, then you can go again.
Yeah.
It is just a mechanism of the nervous system. Somebody here, which is the brain, which is a very selfish tissue, and it's always going to prioritize surviving.
Yeah.
It's going to say, no, stop. That's your limit. So durability is something very linked to neuromuscular function, which is the command of the brain saying, activate this muscle or not. Because the lactate is a preferential source of energy for the nervous system, I suspect there might be something there, and those effects that we see on durability can be linked to the nervous system responding well to having lactate around, which is something that we also validated with carbohydrates. In our study that we did with 120 grams per hour in trial runners, we saw the neuromuscular function the next day was much greater on the 120 versus 90 or versus 60. That's because when you ingest more carbohydrates, you produce more lactate in the body. So I suspect that bypassing that and going straight into lactate is going to promote that as well.
Now, in an age where no stone is left unturned when it comes to performance gains, 4% is massive. Actually, we can scrub that. A 4% improvement in performance is massive for anybody. But how believable is that claim, particularly coming from one of the people who has created this new product? Is it something that others have already looked into or are considering adding to their own sports nutrition offering? Well, to find out, I spoke to Dr. Sam Shepherd, head of sports science at our own nutritional partners, Precision Fuel and Hydration.
Yeah, it's also met with a bit of skepticism on my part. As you rightly suggest, 4% is huge over that 20-minute effort, and and that's probably, if I'm being critical, the higher responders, let's say. That's not the average response, which everyone automatically thinks, and that becomes the marketing slogan to some extent. We can think about what happened with Lucozade back in the day. Was it like 33% longer? And it's that's the average response in theory. And the same might be true here. So not everyone is going to expect a 4% increase in performance in a 20-minute test just by simply fueling with exogenous lactate. So probably a bit fanciful is my kind of take home there. And ultimately time is going to tell, as we keep kind of coming back to here. There's going to be more research done in this area. We're going to look at different performance tests and start to understand when it can be most effective. And probably, like most supplements, what we'll see is that there's a range of effects or levels of or degrees of effect here. So some people will respond really well to it. Some people won't respond to it and maybe go the other way. And if we compare it to something like caffeine or sodium bicarb, probably they're the most two or best evidence, like legal aids, let's say. Something like those, you get maybe like a 1 to 3% increase in time trial performance. That's what we would see in the literature. So it's stacking even higher in theory than those supplements. And, we've been looking at these supplements for 20, 30, 40 years. So there's a significant amount of research supporting those or the level of benefit that you can achieve with those supplements. So yeah, time will tell, I guess, in many ways, with whether that's true or not. But at the moment, I would argue it's probably a little bit hopeful, let's say.
Beyond the claims of a significant increase in power, there's also the claim that it increases a rider's durability. Essentially, that means increasing resistance to fatigue, the ability to produce your best powers at the end of a long, hard race or stage. At that point, many riders find that their power drops. And that's not because they're completely empty of glycogen, rather because your brain steps in to protect the body from exhaustion. But because the brain and nervous system prefer to use lactate over glucose when it's available, flooding the system with exogenous lactate would, in theory at least, keep the central nervous system more lucid and driving hard deep into a race. What is clear is that the professional peloton is really paying attention. We're currently watching the Tour de France. Are there riders and or teams that are already using this?
Yes.
And that's as much as you can say?
That's as much as I can say, unfortunately. I would love to say everything, but
no, yeah. We all understand. So apparently these gels are being used in the Tour de France, but only by one or two select teams. Which ones, we don't know, and we're currently not being told. However, since recording that interview at ITOR, UAE team Emirates revealed that they have been using their own lactate drinks and gels, developed with a professor who ITOR described to me as the godfather of modern lactate understanding, George Brooks. Now, he is the very man who discovered the lactate shuttle theory 3 decades ago. So suddenly, it's evident that exogenous lactate is being, or has been developed in more than one place. So does that give it some more gravitas? Maybe, but as Sam points out, the wider independent scientific community is still waiting to see the actual peer-reviewed data. Now, as ITOR himself honestly pointed out, the testing he talked about was internal company studies. The wider scientific community is yet to validate it with independent research. So I wanted to ask Sam what the general view of the sports science community is.
Actually, this scenario, I suppose, reminds me in many ways of probably like 5 or 10, maybe 5, 6 years ago, actually, the ketones, and when they first came to market, and it really was people seeing athletes using these in the Tour, and there was a lot of hype around them. They were also quite expensive. Didn't taste great either. Can't comment on the lactate gels because I've never tasted one at this point in time. But now, you know, there's been 5 or 6 years of research looking into how we might use ketones, or under what circumstances they work best, and under what circumstances we absolutely shouldn't use them. And what we've worked out now, for the most part, is that the benefits seem to lie in recovery and using ketones to support and optimize recovery. Certainly not using them during events or maybe even before events. So I think it's interesting that athletes are using these gels, and I suppose the underlying thing here is that the science is essentially going to catch up and explain, and or at least help us understand how to optimize the use of this ergogenic aid.
Sam's response there mirrors that of some other scientists and nutritionists who I've spoken to on this subject, one of cautious curiosity. Right now, there's a quiet arms race happening in the World Tour peloton. Teams are desperate to bypass that carbohydrate intake and utilization ceiling, and if exogenous lactate can safely provide even a 0.5% gain in late-stage durability, big budget teams are going to throw a lot at it, and in some cases apparently already have. But where does that leave the rest of us, the mere mortals of this world? If you're tempted to go out and try and buy some online, Sam has some very grounded advice.
Probably won't come as a surprise to you that I would say don't buy this gel at this moment in time. I think it's interesting, you know, from a physiological perspective. Like, the theory here is kind of well established. There's a few gaps in that we need to understand, particularly around the absorption in, you know, through the gut, and that's something that I think we need more information on. But you know, there's other things, let's say, that you would focus your attention on before looking at this, what might be, you know, less than 1% benefit with this, you know, product ultimately. You know, I think there's we always talk about hierarchy of needs, and really, if you're getting the total amount of carbohydrate optimal for you, and then we can consider, you know, the glucose fructose ratio as part of that, the timing of that, you know, what form that's coming in during a session or for racing. Those are the fundamentals really that we want to get right first, and then you can start to layer on, you know, some of these other ergogenic aids, caffeine, which has much more, substantial evidence to support its use.
So I guess it's a case of watch this space. More studies will be done, more evidence will emerge. But in the meantime, the best way to ride faster is still the boring stuff. Training intelligently, nailing your hydration, and consistently hitting your actual carbohydrate targets. But let me know your thoughts. If these gels suddenly became commercially available tomorrow, would you buy them to try and squeeze out an extra few watts on your weekend ride? Or are we reaching a point where sports science is taking the human element out of riding and racing? You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section just down below. Thanks for watching everyone, and I look forward to reading your comments.